Hi, it's Janine from Bipolar She. Before we get started, the content of this podcast does include suicide and suicidal ideation. If you are ever in need, please dial 988, a suicide and crisis lifeline. I believe in the power of speaking and writing about our darkest of days in raw detail. So let's go. Today I sit down with Deirdre, my first interview with a guest whose parent has suffered with mental illness. By age 5, Deirdre's mom was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Through custody battles, divorce, and losing a brother at a young age, she was forced to handle a very adult world. Hi, Deirdre. How are you this morning?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Thank you for coming on the show.
Of course.
All right. This is the first time I've had a guest on who has a parent with mental illness, and I'm really interested in hearing your mom's story. So maybe we could go back to a time in your childhood.
Yeah, of course. So I guess one vivid memory is I think I was around 6 and I was getting ready to go to school, and I came out normal, getting lunch ready, getting myself dressed, teeth brushed, and my mom was on the couch and it seemed a little odd. I went up to nudge her, wake her, talk to her, and she was just completely out, just sleeping. So I went ahead and went to school. And when I got there, my teacher noticed that I had a fever. She could tell that something was off with me. So she sent me to the nurse. The nurse called my mom to come get me. And then my mom didn't answer. So then she had to find my dad. At the time, my parents were not living together. And my dad knew something was wrong, that my mom wasn't home because she should have been home. So in the course of him trying to figure out my fever, he ended up going back to the house and found my mom, and she had attempted to take her life. That was kind of one of my first vivid memories of dealing with mental illness with my mom.
And was it an overdose?
She had taken a bunch of pills, yes.
I'm curious if even before that event, if you ever felt your mom was different than the other moms. Was there ever anything that stood out?
I would say I was probably around 5. And I think one of my first memories was going to see my mom in the hospital, which was such an odd thing to do when you are waiting in this very stark, clean, white, barren room, and you see your mom peering through this like little square glass and realizing that she's not at home and she's wearing a gown and things are off. But I don't think I really knew what that was or what it meant. I just thought, oh, she's at the hospital. She's not well, but I didn't realize it was not well mentally. So that was probably one of my first indications that something was different, but I don't think I could place what it was. And as an adult, I can look back and see, of course, it's all very clear. But as a child, I don't think I knew. I just knew something was off, and it was strange that she wasn't home.
And so at that time, did she have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder?
I believe she did. I believe at that point she had been probably in and out of hospitals a few times, and then had been diagnosed and then was trying to take the medication, or was a prescribed medication, and wasn't able to take it. Later, she told me when we talked about it that she just felt like she didn't have feelings or emotions, and so she did not like the medicine, so she just wouldn't take it. And it was lithium at that time, so it was a pretty powerful drug.
So she felt flat on it?
Yes, very flat.
Do you know anything about the history of the bipolar illness and when she realized it?
I think there were a few triggers. I think most notably was my brother was born a hydrocephalic. From the time he was born, had to have constant care. his brain didn't develop beyond an 8-month-old, and his body developed into a 7-year-old. So he required a lot of home help and a lot of care. And then I was born 3 years after him. So I think my mom was just under a lot of pressure and duress. And what she had told me was that once my brother had started to go kind of south and they had to put him into an institution, I think that was one of the triggers for when she really kind of felt out of control. And then the illness surfaced at that point. And then it just kind of progressed. And then he passed away maybe 2 years, I think, after being institutionalized. And I think that was just a huge, horribly traumatic experience for her.
About how old was she?
She was probably mid-30s, I would say, early to mid-30s.
So at that point, when she went into the hospital, I think you mentioned that your dad was caring for you.
My dad ended up getting custody of me because of her illness, because she couldn't really manage it and manage me and manage herself. But in that period, I was living with him. And then I had other family members who would come in and care for me. My dad was actually in graduate school and also working. So he had a lot going on in his life. Then he was dealing with this divorce, the loss of his son. There was a lot happening all at once.
And then how was your relationship with your dad at that young age?
I think my relationship with my dad and my mom was pretty strong. Even with my mom's illness, I felt like we still had a connection. And then my dad just ended up being, a pretty good caretaker, looking out for me. But he was very busy with his own life. So there was a lot of time where I was kind of left to my own devices and felt like I kind of raised myself in a lot of ways, just because the attention was, I'm sure he had to pay bills and, take care of his own professional life and making sure I was cared for, and then also worried about my mom. So I think I spent a lot of time just kind of independently reading or entertaining myself.
Was there a custody battle?
There was. It was kind of sad when you think back on it, because my dad had to get the neighbors and family members to speak out on his behalf, to share that it was important for him to have custody versus my mom. And my mom at the time was just not in a mentally stable place to be able to fight for me, really. And it was probably good in the end that he did get custody. But I think it was a really hard period for her, for sure. Having to witness that and seeing, family members and friends and neighbors saying that my dad would be a better parent. And we did talk about it later in life. I did get to hear kind of her side of the story, but it was historic at the time because men were not getting custody of, especially daughters at that time. That was in the 70s.
I'm curious if you know how your mom did and how she survived being on her own, handling this illness, having the kids, or just you intermittently.
Mm-hmm.
How did she keep going?
I think she really leaned on her family a lot. She really leaned on a few friends. She ended up just getting kind of a small job to help her, survive, pay the bills. But she really did, I think, find a lot of comfort and help and support from her sisters. She had a couple sisters that lived locally. There was a couple years, I believe, where she didn't really get to spend a lot of time with me because my father still felt like he didn't trust her. He didn't trust her stability or what she could do or what she was capable of. And so he definitely kind of put a restriction on visitation with me. But there was a lot of letters and phone calls and that type of thing, but not a lot of physical in-person visiting.
And at one point, your dad did make the decision that it was okay for you to have more of a relationship with her?
Yeah, I think once she became a little more stable with her medication and she kind of had for lack of a better term, a good track record. She hadn't been in a mental hospital for a while, and it seemed like she was on her medicine and sticking with it. And then he kind of built up some trust and felt like it was time that I could spend more time with her. But I do remember as a kid always feeling kind of guilty that she didn't have me full time and that she was missing out on a lot of those experiences that are, pretty normal for moms to have with their kids.
So, what do you mean by guilty?
Like feeling like that pressure, like just because she had mental illness didn't mean she didn't deserve to spend time with her daughter, right? So it just felt like unfair. And then I guess I just carried some of the guilt because I knew that she wanted to spend time with me and she just wasn't able to.
And that was in high school when you started feeling that way, or even younger?
I would say younger. Yeah, probably elementary school. And then I think as I got older in junior high and high school, when I really realized the impact that it had of not seeing me through dance recitals or plays or like all the normal things that parents get to spend their time with their kids doing, I think then I made a conscious effort to try to spend more time with her. So I would try to go maybe a couple weekends a month and go hang out with her for the weekend just to like kind of regain some of that time.
Wow. So you felt a lot of responsibility?
For sure. Yeah, I had a lot of compassion just knowing all she had gone through. And it just kind of seemed unfair, to have your son pass away and first of all be born hydrocephalic and having these, bodily issues and then your own mental issues, then losing custody of your daughter and getting divorced from the love of your life. And I mean, she just went through so much like turmoil and trauma. And I just always was really aware of that.
Yeah, I'm curious about her happiness and how she got through it, but more so you. Would you describe yourself as a happy kid?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Kids are so resilient. And I think that was one lesson through all of this that I realized is I don't know if it's just luck of the draw or just my, the whole nature versus nurture argument, but I really felt like all of the adversity and all of the negativity, somehow it didn't break me down. It almost made me stronger and just felt like I really appreciate, the small things in life and the little moments because I realize how fleeting they can be.
So you were little when you learned to think that way.
I think so. I mean, I'm sure I'm putting some words into my 5-year-old or 6-year-old mouth, but I really do believe I kind of learned that lesson pretty young of how, just witnessing death and divorce and mental illness all by the time I was 6, I think, I don't want to say I became a hardened 6-year-old by any stretch, but I definitely was made aware of things that, life is not always pretty and how to kind of deal with that and still get through it.
And did you leave to go to college?
I actually joined the Army right out of high school.
Wait, how many years were you serving?
I did 5 years active duty as a photojournalist in the Army and then 3 years in the National Guard. I mean, I also took classes while I was in the military, but when I got out of the military is when I finished school. And now I'm studying couple and family therapy. So very excited about that.
Do you feel comfortable in crisis?
I do. I think I'm having that realization of, I probably thrive in crisis because it's all I've known since a very young age and it feels very comfortable to me. I think when I'm in crisis is probably when I'm strongest, which is ironic.
And you're not afraid to get in the middle of others and their crises?
No, I guess not. I feel like I can be a really calming resource and I feel like I can see the big picture and kind of see the root of the issue and help people hopefully to see it too and to find that commonality between us. My husband might have different thoughts on that, but I try.
I'm also curious how this impacted you when you got married and were thinking about starting a family, having kids.
Yeah, I think it was always scary. Just the thought of having kids, just seeing, my brother pass away at such a young age and the impact that had on my parents. I think I always just had this very realistic view on having children that, so many of my friends would get to a certain age and be so excited to have a baby. And I always thought it's not a baby. It's a human. It's going to be an 18-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old someday. I always took that really seriously. And I think when I met my husband, we got married when we were around early 30s. And I think we were just at that place of life of really thinking it through and what are the impacts of having children. And I just thought, I could still find myself facing mental illness. I didn't know. And I just didn't want to put a child through what I had to go through. And it was just scary, just the thought of either passing that along because my grandmother had bipolar and my mom. I didn't know if maybe I did as well at that point. And yeah, it was a frightening prospect to think about bringing a child into the world, not knowing what could happen.
But were you afraid that you might have mental illness? And if so, were there any glimmers of it or anything that made you frightened about that?
I have no memory of anything happening that made me think I could have bipolar, but I also knew my mom, it seemed to strike her when she was in her early 30s. So I was well aware of that timeline. I think also just aware of, the reality of it's not always pretty when you have children and there's struggles. And it was just one battle or one challenge or one experience, I guess I just wasn't willing to take.
And so I know you mentioned, this obviously really shapes you as a person and shapes the careers you go into. And you're currently back in school. Are you learning more about yourself and more about this relationship with your mom in this program that you're doing?
For sure. I call it my soul-bearing years because the things you have to share when you're studying to be a therapist are very intense and deep. But I just keep thinking, how could I be a better advocate? Because with my experience, I should, have a wealth of knowledge. Obviously, I have not battled mental illness myself, so I don't know what that's like, but I feel like I have a lot of compassion and understanding and empathy for those who have.
We were talking a little bit before about listening and how important that is, and just about any modality, but how it kind of has come up again for you.
Listening is so key. Everyone wants to be listened to. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone wants to be prioritized to some degree. So I feel like that's one of my gifts. I know early on in the program when I was nervous about a 30-minute session that I had to do as a role play, one of my, kind of a woman who's becoming my mentor, she said, "Can you listen for 30 minutes?" And I said, "Absolutely." And she said, "That's all you have to do." I do feel like so much could be accomplished and so much could be made better if people just listen better to each other. I'm curious what your thoughts are, like hearing this from a person who experienced it through a parent. I'm just curious what comes up for you.
Yeah, that's interesting. As I listened to it, I think I was asking a lot of questions about your mom and her relationship to everything that was going on, more so than your well-being, because I was just so curious what that would be like. I feel it's kind of devastating in a way, because I can imagine myself being in a situation like that and having to be hospitalized while having a child and, really having a hard time with that, definitely. So I feel like as you tell me about her, I can feel myself in that room looking through the little window at my child and sharing letters with her. It's easy for me to put myself there. But it's also tough to know that that's a factor in having children or not. So that's difficult, because I think if I had had the opportunity to have kids and everything would have been set up just fine, I probably would have. I probably would not even think about my own mental health in the sense that, hey, if I raise this kid right, they'll be in the clear. So that to me is like, oh gosh, if we could just snip out a little mental illness, the bipolar gene out of me, then I'd be acceptable. So I think that's a little painful for me to hear too, that is part of a choice not to have children, even though it's a very real, honest way to look at it. I mean, I spent a lot of time in hospitals and recovering, and it probably would have been a negative thing for a child, but it's still all difficult for me to hear.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I had such empathy for my mom, and we had so many conversations about it, and her guilt of feeling like, especially when she tried to die by suicide, and she said, "You just don't understand what it's like." I was in this deep, dark hole, and I couldn't get out. And to hear that and think like, gosh, I'm just a 5-year-old probably trying to play with blocks or something, or read, or spend time with my mom, and here she is trying to fight to get out of this hole. So I think when you hear those illustrations, or you think of those moments that she must have struggled, I think that's what sticks with me. Not so much of like it's a stigma, or it's like, oh, you have a mental illness, you should not have children, or you experienced it, do not do that. It's more just that those vivid memories I have, and the words that she shared with me, and the feelings. And I think that's probably what made the most impact. So
I think it's definitely a story of resilience. Do you feel that way? Do you feel pretty resilient?
I do. I feel like when you're forced to be resilient almost as a survival mechanism, it's just becomes part of who you are. So I don't even know if I can claim it as some skill or a characteristic that I've developed or honed. I think it was just required in order to get through and just have kind of a normalcy with my school work, with my developing as a human. I think I just needed to kind of have a layer and a shield to protect myself, but I don't think I knew what that was. And then now I think I see it, and I have seen it throughout my career in crisis communications, where I feel like it's just natural for me to react and not get, not lose control, or just kind of stay calm. And I think that was just how I probably coped as a kid, and it's just transferred into adulthood.
Yeah, it sounds like you found your calling. Absolutely.
I hope so. Yeah, I think it'll be really special to be able to be in a room with someone and talk through some of those raw, vulnerable moments that they've experienced, in whatever form, and just help be a support system and help listen and give them the guidance, or just the hearing that they need, the listening that they need.
Thank you for sharing your story and your mom's story.
I think the older I get, the more I think about it, the more I realize just how remarkable she was, like to go through all she did, but to still keep that spirit. She still had a very lively and lovable and generous spirit. And I just think, I've hardly faced any adversity, I guess, from maybe middle school on. So it just feels almost wrong that she was delivered so much, but yet she still prevailed. Her spirit prevailed. And to me, that's such a remarkable thing, and such a remarkable commentary on humans and how resilient we really all are. So it's a beautiful thing.
It is, definitely. Well, she sounds like a very interesting woman.
For sure. She definitely was.
Yeah, well, I would have loved to have met her.
Thank you.
And your dad passed away also?
Yes, they both passed away really young. So my mom was 64 and my dad was 69.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they had pretty short lives.
Yeah.
And pretty rough lives. But I still feel like we still had good relationships, even with all the adversity and all of the craziness, and some of the times when I wanted a home-cooked meal or just the kind of normal things like a parent to pack my lunch. And I didn't really get that, but I got other things. So
I'm kind of looking at you like, how did you keep yourself together through all that as a kid? And then even going into the Army, I mean, that just is all very intense, but I can see how that childhood did prepare you for conflict and a sense of safety and chaos, basically.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but I think you're right. Like there is for me that sense of comfort almost in chaos. Like I feel like I do better if it's chaotic versus if it's too quiet or too calm. But yeah, I think when you're a kid and you just don't know better, right? I don't think I remember comparing with other friends or thinking like, this is really interesting. I'm on my 4th elementary school and I'm only in 5th grade. I don't think I really thought that, like I didn't have the analytical skills to understand the impacts of that or why was this happening or to even question it. But I think it definitely built me up to have a lot of confidence, even when I wasn't confident, because I felt like I wanted to appear confident and appear like everything was together, even though I probably deep in my little 6-year-old self knew, or 8-year-old self or 10-year-old self, whatever stage I was in, I probably knew things were not okay, but it was a way to make them okay, I guess. I really do feel like I am curious, just as I've realized in my young and older adulthood that people have different upbringings and different experiences and different ways of being raised. And so I think that's part of what's driving my schooling now also is just that curiosity of, what's happening in your home and where do you need help or where are you not feeling supported and how can I help with that? So I feel like that's probably what I would have loved to have had is someone every day asking me, what can I do to help you? And it's hard to ask for help when it wasn't made available to you. So I've even learned as an adult how to ask for help. And so I guess I just want to be able to offer that help without someone having to ask.
Thanks for listening to Bipolar She. We are an independent podcast and can only make it if you share what you hear, like and follow us, and all that social media stuff. We are grateful for the support. Thanks.